Welcome to Straight Up, brought to you by Peak Prosperity, which values context, curiosity, and learning that leads to action. Reading from his latest works and expanding on current events in the economy, energy, and environment, it is my pleasure to introduce your host, Dr. Chris Martinson.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Straight Up. Today, we are going to be reading from the piece called Extreme Frugality. This was posted on Friday, June 28th, 2019. This is a needed mindset for the age we live in. We didn't have a lot growing up, as my mom had to single-parent 3 kids. Most anything I wanted required disciplined frugality. That's just how I grew up. I bought my first fly rod from Orvis at the age of 13, which took the better part of a year to save up for. I hand-tied the first flies drifted from its lines from the hackles of roosters I raised expressly for that purpose. Why? Because buying the feathers was too expensive. In my later teens, I took a long cross-country climbing/working road trip where I lived on sometimes $5 a week. This was the 1980s. So do the math. Doing so was in an art form which involved often dried beans and camping for free on federal lands, including the time I woke up in a national forest to a large bull pawing and snorting a few yards from my tent. I knew nothing about the behavior of bulls, and still don't. But I knew that wasn't a good sign, so I backed away, using the tent as a shield, and climbed a tree and waited for him to wander off. Sleeping on the ground or on sofas even today doesn't bother me. I'm remarkably unpicky as an eater. I'm just easy that way. All of which is to say that being frugal and making do with what's on hand comes kind of naturally to me. Now, don't get me wrong. I can enjoy spending money with the best of them and have indulged in some very expensive hobbies in my life. But I can also zipper the wallet and not skip a beat. And I'm glad I can, because being frugal is an extremely valuable skill to employ as we get ready for a future of less. Sometime, much sooner than we'll be ready for, the systems upon which we rely will fail us. The weather system is already becoming intolerably wonky. Heat in Europe right now, record-breaking heat, crop-ruining rains in the U.S. Farm Belt, destroying a growing season for many, and unprecedented heat in the Arctic are all telling us that something is terribly amiss. In fact, at this moment, on an 80-degree late June night in New England, I am typing next to an open window, no screen, the room lights are on, and there are exactly, let me count, 0 insects flying about the room. Not a single one. I'm old enough to remember the swarms of beetles, moths, mosquitoes, and other bugs that such a night would have brought. That they aren't here tonight is extremely unsettling to me. Anybody who can read or access the internet and has at least minimal curiosity can detect the signs of the deep stress all around us, in our environment, in our society, and in our economy. It's critical to realize that everything in the financial sphere, from the lofty prices of stocks and bonds to the financial solvency of nations, depends on this one thing, on the future economy being not just larger, but exponentially larger than it currently is. But this expectation is flawed. You can't ever increasingly extract exponential growth from a finite system. A credit recession that almost destroyed the global economy last time, that was in 2008, is here again. We're going to see something like it. There's now an even larger one, primed and ready to burst. The officials are fighting that tooth and nail. Of course they don't want that to burst. They'll do everything possible, including making the bubble larger as they attempt to avoid the inevitable. But you'd never know any of this by watching the nightly news or reading the major media outlets, because the more dangerously lopsided things become, the more urgently the entire interlocking system of narrative control works to convince the masses, that's you and me, that everything is fine. Heck, everything's awesome. But curious critical thinkers like you and I know that's not true. Our knowing that it's not true is in the ecological data, which is horrifying. And by the way, as an aside, this next 3 paragraphs is just packed with links, okay? Virtually every sentence I'm going to say now has an associated link that you could follow through for more information. So check out the printed version of this, or the web version of this, I should say. Print, who does that anymore, right? The web version of this if you're interested in following these links. All right, so our knowings in the ecological data, which I mentioned, which is horrifying. Plastic pollution, now virtually everywhere. Vanishing insect and amphibian populations. We have steadily declining phytoplankton levels. Weather anomalies shattering records across the globe. Food chain disruptions in the oceans, leading to massive bird and whale die-offs right now. And coral reefs disappearing with frightening speed. Our knowing is in the cultural and sociological data, which show that the epidemic of obesity continues to worsen. Suicide rates have recently hit record high levels. Multiplying feelings increasingly of isolation are being reported by people, and record levels of being miserable and unhappy are being recorded around the globe. It's in the economic data, which shows the widest wealth and income gaps in history. 62% of millennials struggling from paycheck to paycheck. That's nearly 2 out of 3. Desperate central banks that are able only to conceive of ever more stimulus or easing efforts. Massive and rapidly growing debt piles. The misery of households that do not have any emergency buffers to draw upon. And in the U.S. alone, over $200 trillion with a T dollars of underfunded pension and Medicare promises that realistically, come on people, they can't ever be met. Now, even if we could set all of that miserable litany aside that I just read out, and we cannot, of course, but even if we could, a looming net energy crisis tells us that the future will be terribly different from the past. Most people are unaware, falsely lulled by the recent U.S. shale Ponzi, that oil production will indeed peak and then decline. Most people don't know that. Or that total net energy output from fossil fuel production is already falling steadily, now that all the easy oil and gas are gone. Yeah, there's the shale stuff, but that's not easy, which means it's not energetically rich anymore. Our economic and population arrangements, of course, were made back when huge 100-to-1 net energy returns from fossil fuels were routine. Comprehensive planning and mitigation strategies have to be made right away if we are to successfully transition to the lower, call it 5-to-1 returns offered by shale oil and solar. 40 to 60 years are required to effect a smooth energy transition. Meanwhile, it kind of looks like oil output may well peak in the U.S. around 2025. That's from the EIA, and a lot of that depends on the continuation of easy credit for the drillers as well as a high price for oil. So, move either of those two variables and the peak could come a little bit earlier or later. But we do know that oil production has already peaked and gone down in 18 countries around the world since 2005, and that the world remains heavily dependent on the output of oil from a small handful of aging supergiant oil fields discovered and put into service more than 50 years ago. Okay, these are the big ones, right? The Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia, things like that. Well, in other words, we don't have 40 to 60 years. We may only have 10 years before world oil output peaks, yet no urgency can be detected in the official policies of literally any of the world's major nations. They're all pursuing business as usual. Economic growth, more stimulus, just grow faster. Industrially farmed soils are going to be completely exhausted within 40 to 60 years, requiring ever larger fossil fuel energy inputs to keep them transiently supplied with nutrients. So add up all of that. What do you have? Well, a very strong case for an uncertain future, of course. My interpretation is these are the warning signs of a global culture that has grown past its natural carrying capacity, but has yet to face that reality. Which is why the sociological data tells me that people are really worried, even if many of them cannot exactly pinpoint why. Which brings us to extreme frugality. So given all that, everybody wants to know, what should I do? It turns out there's one fairly robust response that any individual can employ that will help address the developing predicaments identified above, and that is extreme frugality. Don't have much money? Then spend less. Have money and want to protect it? Also, spend less. Want to protect the natural world? Then consume less. Want to be happier? Then spend less and gain more free time because you don't have to work as hard. Are you worried about money? Then spend less, save more, and have more. Want to resist corporations' endless grabbing of your money? Then be frugal. Starve them. Want to retire earlier? Spend less, save more. The answer to many of the challenges we face are directly addressed by spending less and consuming less. Now, taking a cue from an old Saturday Night Live skit with Steve Martin, if you can't afford it, don't buy it. And I've got a link in the web version to a Vimeo video of that old Saturday Night Live skit. It's funny. And there's a lot to be said for frugality, and especially extreme frugality. By cutting out all unnecessary expenses, you align your concerns with your actions. It helps you regain control over your financial life, especially if you are on or over the edge. I hate to say this, but statistically speaking, that's most of the people out there. Now, this won't work for everybody. Some people just don't have the psychological makeup to be frugal. They're too addicted to the instant gratification, buy now, pay later consumerism that corporate retailers and credit card companies do their best to hook us all on. But the concept of extreme frugality, it doesn't frighten me or seem like deprivation. It kind of just fits with who I am. I'm perfectly happy scoring a used dented item at a tag sale or on freecycle.org as long as it suits my needs. And it shouldn't frighten you. Frugality is one of the fastest paths towards relieving the ever-present money worries that plague most of us. It's a freeing act. It's not an act of deprivation. It frees you. The less money you require, the less control money has over you. How you spend your time and your level of happiness are all linked to that. Now, I'm not saying we all have to become ascetics and embrace a life of poverty. What I am saying is that frugality helps recenter our priorities away from the superficial and material and towards true substance, fulfilling relationships, meaningful activity, or connection to nature. Henry David Thoreau captured the gestalt of extreme frugality extremely well when he penned, "I make myself rich by making my wants few." Now, there's a lot of levels to that. One of them is financial, but I think that captures it really well. And as we, as individuals, reduce our level of consumerism, collectively, we reduce the demand our economy places on our strained ecosystems. That's a good thing. That buys us time. And given all that's at stake, it seems like we should at least be willing to give this a try, right? So, how do we get started? Look, the world is changing rapidly, and nobody knows how long the current good times will last. I don't. It could be a few more decades. We don't know. And we're well overdue for some kind of market clearing event, right? The next recession may trigger it, or maybe it's more record-breaking weather that strains the system. It's a debt crisis, maybe an implosion of the current credit cycle. Heck, I don't know. The list of candidates is really long. At Peak Prosperity, we've been staunch advocates of keeping your money safe, building multiple streams of income, and being as thoughtful as possible in your financial affairs. Given the extreme state of the world, and given that tighter times almost certainly lie before us, it only makes sense to explore and adopt as many sensible frugality measures as we can, while we can still do them on our own terms. One of the great killers of the last big bust in 2008 for many people was their too slow dialing back of expenses. Some people, they lost their jobs, but kept up the same level of spending, thinking they were going to get another job soon. But they didn't. And their kids stayed in private schools. Eating out continued. Every subscription cell phone plan remained in place. And when the unemployment rate kept rising and the savings were finally gone, many families experienced the deep trauma of sudden, forcibly imposed austerity, which was not fun at all, right? It's really, really difficult to have frugality imposed on you. Learning the skills and habits of being frugal will be important, especially for many people, given the future of less that's coming. Indeed, as wide-scale layoffs are starting to happen again, it's in the data, we have a link to that here, well, for many, it's already arriving right now. And it's already arrived for all of those people who are already living rough, living in cars, in RVs, in tents, under cardboard in places like San Francisco and LA and other places. Those looking to kickstart a more frugal lifestyle can begin with these straightforward steps. And by the way, we have links on each one of those. Step 1, create a good set of books for your finances. Have a solid income statement and a balance sheet. Step 2, identify all expenses that can be trimmed and cut, as many as you can. And then set a budget and stick to it. Step 3, identify passive income streams that you can build over time and get started on them. We created a detailed report here on the topic. That's a link. Also, our excellent educational webinar series on investing in income-producing real estate has been praised by many as extremely valuable. Link to that as well. Step 4, whatever money you have invested in the markets, be sure it's being managed prudently by professionals who understand the growing risks of a damaging market decline. Feel free to schedule a free portfolio crash audit with a financial advisor that Peak Prosperity endorses, and there's a link to that here as well. But if you already have a good handle on these steps, as many Peak Prosperity readers already do, there's an exploding global community based on extreme frugality that you can plug right into. Now that brings us to the end of part 1 here, which is the public version. In part 2, we explore the topic. The title is Live Frugally, Retire Comfortably. And we look at the major strategies recommended by the leading resources in this community of frugality for reducing your money footprint and advancing the date when you achieve financial independence. Now, financial independence doesn't mean you're rich beyond all measure. It simply means you have enough income to support your lifestyle, and that income is in perpetuity. There are many levers to pull, on both the income and the expense sides of the ledger. Your task is to determine which levers are best for you, but the key here is to do the math and then take informed action. Your future resilient self depends on it. And that brings us to the end of this part, Extreme Frugality, Part 1. Thank you so much for listening. This is Chris Martenson. I will see you next time.